Your call cannot be completed as dialed. Please consult your
Hello.
Hey, Mayor, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. So we have you on the call. We're going to go ahead and get started. If you could just mute your phone, that would be great.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, good afternoon. I think we have a quorum. We're going to call a roll and find out for sure, and then we're going to charge off and see where we are and find out what we're doing. Both Victor and Michael have hard stops at 5:15. I told them with any luck, we'll all be walking out the door with them or before them. Okay. Okay. Janae.
Okay. For the April 19th meeting of the Charter Review Commission meeting, Honorable Judge Adrian.
Here.
We have Diane Downing. Not here.
Not here.
Excuse me. The Honorable Drucker. Here. Dennis Kennedy. Here. Michael King. Here. The Honorable Persiak.
Here.
Claire Rosacco. Here. Victor Ruiz. Here. And Davita Russell. She's not here.
Okay. So I'm going to declare a quorum, and we are at the spot where we're going to continue the discussions that we've been having as it relates to succession modifications for county exec and county council. And at the end of the last session, Councilman Miller had indicated that he was going to take under advisement the conversations that we had the last time around, and I want to give him an opportunity to make any other statements that he might want to make before we get going.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to work with you all, and I know it's a very, very challenging thing, and I would simply reiterate that the purpose of any charter amendment is to deal with some deficiencies in the language, and I think in my initial presentation I identified some deficiencies, and I still think they're the same. You know, the first is that having the council president succeed the executive creates a disruption in both the legislative and the executive branch, and I had looked around to see what I could find, and Summit County was the only other place that did it this way, and in their case they had language that where it was temporary, where in our language the vacancy is permanent. The second problem I identified is that we relied too heavily in the current language on appointments where people could stay appointed for a long time before they had to face an election, and we created systems where people would have a pretty strong hand in appointing their successors, despite the fact that that we don't know what the circumstances are under which people would be leaving. And then there was the technical problem that the existing language doesn't work well if the vacancy occurred at certain times in the election cycle. So far, we've been fortunate to have vacancies occur at fortuitous times, but that's not something that we can expect in the future. And so at a previous meeting, I brought forward a revised draft that was still basically responsive to these problems with the existing language, but revised some of the concepts that seem to be more controversial, such as the idea that somebody running in a succession election should not be the same person who was the interim. So my revised draft took that out, and it extended some of the time frames which the commission seemed to feel were too short. But generally that revised draft I feel would answer some of the concerns that were raised and still would be responsive to the identified deficiencies in the charter language. So that's what I would say.
Thank you. Before we go any farther, I just want the record to reflect that Ms. Downing has joined the meeting. Good afternoon. How are you? Good, good. And so, just to bring you up to speed, you haven't missed much. Okay, you got a chance to hear Dale, and before that, we hadn't done nothing. Okay. So, any questions for Councilman Miller? Before we proceed further, a number of you had raised some questions, some of which he addressed in his revised proposal. I don't know if there are still outstanding concerns that you would like to see addressed that are not addressed yet. So I just want to open the floor for discussion. Mike, you got anything?
Not at the moment.
Okay. Nothing.
None from me.
Nothing from Tom. Claire, nothing for you. Diane. Good. Okay. So, did we submit this to law department?
Not yet. I believe there were a couple more that you all needed to review. I don't think we had opportunity to get through all of them.
As far as proposals for succession?
Correct.
So, okay. Which ones are still outstanding, Janae?
Or maybe we did. Can someone, because I know it was some additional questions.
I think at least one of the issues that we hadn't really gotten into was the if there was some type of temporary vacancy in the office of the executive, and I don't think we really landed anywhere yet as it relates to how council succession would work. We had some discussion, but I don't think we had a really sort of consensus on that yet.
And there was, Mr. Chair, I think we had asked the prosecutor to look into, with the Board of Elections, some information on these timelines to make sure that those would be consistent. That was, I think, Brendan was here from the prosecutor's office.
And it's my understanding that the Board of Elections has not weighed in yet, right?
Correct.
Okay. So with regard to, I think that for me the thing that's most pressing is the question of temporary vacancies and how those are addressed. And so I don't know how everybody feels about, putting a pin into that one to see how it goes. Any thoughts?
You want me to go first? I think for temporary would be different than a permanent vacancy in that the focus from a permanent vacancy is more along the lines of honoring the decision made by the electorate, whereas if it's temporary for, some finite period of time, that it could probably be an internal assignment of responsibilities. As I know, if it was, going to something that ultimately would lead to an election, you want to give the benefit to having the people make a choice in that. But if there's some reason for incapacity of the executive, I think that if that's short term, that would be something administratively that could be handled by another staff member. I mean, that's just my 2 cents there.
Interesting. I think my concern with regard to temporary vacancies is at what point do you decide that somebody's incapacity is such that it requires some transfer of responsibilities in an interim period of time, more than just a day-to-day situation, and what triggers, that kind of a finding? Are we and who makes the call? So I think that those are kinds of things that perhaps we would want to try to add to the by way of charter language. But having raised all those questions, I don't know that I have good answers. Any thoughts?
Did anybody define temporary? What is temporary? 14 days, 30 days, 60 days? What? I mean, did I miss that?
Oh, my point exactly. Okay. We hadn't really gotten to, at what point do we decide that the position for all intents and purposes is vacant, and do you make a determination that the person has been unable to perform for 14 days, and now someone has come in and has indicated that they're not going to be able to, perform for 30 more, but in 40 days they should be back at their station. I think that there are gates that need to go through.
So, just
And I
Go ahead, Tom.
go ahead, Mayor.
no, just take FMLA leave. Sometimes it's 6 weeks.
Right.
So does that mean that there should, is that a vacancy or is that just a leave? I mean,
That's what I wondered.
that's what I don't understand.
So, Mayor, it's Claire, and I'm with you. I kind of wondered what happens today in that situation if we know. If somebody does have an extended period of absence, do we define it today? And who steps in? I'm kind of looking at poor Michael because he's such an authority, and even to the county councilman. What happens today if somebody's out for a couple of weeks, maybe due to illness, et cetera?
Yeah, I don't think we've had a situation. I mean, obviously, we've had county executives who do go on vacation,
Right.
For a week or two, something like that. And in those instances, the executive can have a designee that can sign things for him. I know in the past, the law director has signed legislation in certain instances where the executive was unavailable. But again, I think that would be different than a situation where, they're incapacitated and unable to, if the law director can always call the executive and say, hey, I need direction on this, even if they're on vacation, you can still do that.
Right.
If we're talking about a situation where, somebody's in a coma or, what have you, that's where I think we really get into some uncharted territory. I mean, in terms of the judge's point about who determines, I mean, the only model I've I can think of for this type of example would be the 25th Amendment, which, where you have the cabinet declare that the president's unable to do the job, and then they send it over to Congress, and then Congress, makes a determination of some kind, and then the president has the ability to challenge that. It's like, it gets more convoluted. So, I mean, we do have, in a sense, a cabinet here in the fact that we have, the appointed officials under the charter that we could use as some type of, mirror to what's in the U.S. Constitution. Again, I don't know if that's overcomplicating things, and again, we'd need to figure out how long would that go on. I mean, if, say somebody was incapacitated for an indefinite amount of time, if it lasts, a month, 5 months, however long, at what point do you say, okay, this temporary vacancy is now permanent, and we go through the normal procedures? I don't.
Yeah, I think that's really the question that we're debating is, do we need to have a process that handles temporary vacancies, or does the current situation as it relates to leave actually cover temporary, absences? Yes.
A couple thoughts. One is, I think we're walking into dangerous territory. If someone files FMLA, they're protected. There's nothing anyone can do. I believe up to 12 weeks is, so I think we need to stay away from that. And just from listening to the conversation, sounds like a temporary could and maybe should just remain an administrative decision. You're saying there's a process in place for someone else to sign should the executive be absent, whether it's the law director or the president of council, whoever that may be. And I think we've got to be careful stepping into legalities to find the time because somebody's sick. If they file FMLA, nobody can do anything about it. So, and I don't really know if that should be, those are the things where you start saying, do you want something like that in a charter that's, then you're bound by it, or do you keep something that's a policy and just
Susan,
ruled administratively? Yes.
If I may, I think we have to define, the executive is a full-time employee of the county. Even though he is elected, he's entitled, to the best of my knowledge, to all of the county benefits. Now, let's get to the county council. I don't believe that they are considered an employee of the county. They are elected officials, and do they receive benefits? And are they covered, or does the statute allow them to exercise any type of FMLA benefits? That's I think we got to figure that out. I don't know the answer to that.
I can hopefully shed some light on that. I don't believe the council members or the county executive are technically defined as employees under the county's HR policies. They do receive benefits, and that's true for, if you look at other elected officials and other offices in the state of Ohio, a lot of elected officials, if not all of them, are eligible for PERS and other types of benefits. So that they do receive benefits, but for the purposes of at least the internal county policies, they are not considered employees. They're considered officials. But I don't know if that extends to FMLA definitions, because that's federal. So that we may need some guidance from the law department on that.
Well, that's what Susan and I are talking about.
Right.
We need to know that.
Well, but do they accrue, as part of the benefits, do they accrue sick time? Because if you accrue sick time, then I believe you'd be covered under FMLA, at least the executive. Does he get sick time?
I don't believe the executive fills out timesheets. So there's no
Okay,
accrual of time.
okay, well then that could possibly, but then you're getting into, okay, they're elected officials, then they don't have to be here any specific amount of time. So technically, they can be gone for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and they still have a job because they're elected officials. So we have to, that's why I think we're getting into,
I know it sounds like we're
like our last conversation, we round right back up to, maybe this original language is okay after all.
Point. I understand time off, but at one point are they not doing their job? Is that spelled out anywhere? Is it even our right to
Yeah.
lay that out? I mean, I could see, taking time, but at what point longer in doing their duty?
So the one thing in the charter that does kind of speak to that is the council members, if they have 3 unexcused absences at council meetings, they basically vacate the seat by default. That obviously hasn't happened, and council can excuse absences. So if somebody is legitimately sick and they don't attend a council meeting, then they can be excused, and that's fine. But if they have 3 consecutive unexcused absences, they forfeit their seat. There's not, to my recollection, anything in the charter that has a similar type of provision for the county executive.
So the challenge is if the person, the office holder, is not going to get better to the point where he or she can resume the duties, how do you define that? And again, is that something that, goes into a charter? I don't think it is, but it's the concept of this person is never going to be able to return to work, even with the benefits, of leave, but, some other drastic action has to take place. And how do we want to work with that in terms of the succession issue? I don't quite know, because it seems to be getting into the weeds, and so how do you go from here?
Yeah, any kind of a fundamental document like the charter, it always seems to me that less is more.
Right.
Okay, you just don't want to put a whole lot of additional verbiage in it that is not necessary. This is kind of a unique kind of take on things, because it goes to the ability of individuals to function. So, I mean, if somebody is unable to perform for whatever reason for an extended period of time, it seems to me that there ought to be some kind of a trigger that says, if just like with the missing 3 consecutive meetings, that makes all kinds of sense. Okay, now the seat is, for all intents and purposes, vacant. Let's put somebody else in if they're unexcused. But I don't know how you would do that with the county executive. You aren't going to say if he failed to come to work for 3 days, that you're going to kick him out the door.
So is it unreasonable to think that if the county executive is unable to be responsive to their position, and I don't mean they're in a coma, I mean they're just not, is it reasonable to think that, 30 consecutive days, is that unreasonable? Is that reasonable if they're unable, and then we go into the whatever that succession plan is? Because if they're unable to do their job, they're not going to be able to run for re-election, right? So that's the end of their term. I'm trying to figure this out and thinking out loud and not making sense, but I'm just wondering. I think the hard part is identifying at what point.
What is the trigger?
Right, and it, and I'll throw out there 30 consecutive days.
But is that 30 consecutive days they were amongst the missing? 30 consecutive days that they failed to perform? I mean,
that's why I liked your point about unresponsive, because you could be in the hospital and still do your job, ultimately, and still sign documents and still make decisions if you had to, depending on how incapacitated you are, you could. So I'm with you. It's just, again, back to, do you say unresponsive? That's different, because then maybe the law director's in for a while doing the short term, because that person really can't do the job for whatever reason.
Then if you go down that rabbit hole, the question is, what constitutes responsive?
Right.
I mean, it's, it's
right.
like peeling back the
onion.
leaves of an onion, because every time we raise one thing, there's something else. And then that comes back to Diane's piece. You know, I mean, we're evaluating these things from the standpoint of whether or not anything that we might do is going to make things better or make them worse.
Right.
And you know, at this juncture, maybe out of dumb luck, you know, we haven't had to deal with it. That doesn't mean that we're not going to. So, ounce of prevention kind of thing. But the question is, what kind of ounce of prevention? We don't want the ounce of prevention to be toxic.
Right. Exactly.
One other thing just to keep in mind, and I'm not saying this is going to be the cure-all for what we're talking about, but the county executive is technically subject to a recall petition. So if, you know, a county executive legitimately went AWOL for whatever reason and wasn't showing up to work or something like that, it's a high burden to reach in order to remove an executive from office, no doubt. But it is some mechanism by which, if there was some, you know, massive public outrage about some AWOL executive that wasn't showing up and doing the job, there is a mechanism for removal and triggering the vacancy.
Okay. So I don't know where that leaves us. I kind of feel like we're at the same spot we were when we started the conversation. Sure, of course.
I'm in agreement that it's probably too complex and too much to it to put in the charter language. You not only have to provide for how you trigger it, but also how you exit from it, and it's a lot. And so I would just call to your attention the language that I recommended in my draft, which is that it said that the county council shall provide by ordinance for temporary vacancies, and the other option you might consider is changing it to shall to may, you know, so that you give the council the empowerment to do it if it comes up with what it feels is a workable process and that has support, but not require that it be done. So I think absent such language, if the county council tried to do it on its own, it might be able to, but it might also be challenged. And I think to give it the authorization in the charter would be useful.
So let me understand what I think I'm hearing you say. So your language would then read, in the event that the office of a county executive becomes vacant by reason of death, removal from office, failure to remain an elector of the county, or for any other reason, the law director may perform the duties of the county executive?
No, this is, if you look at the proposed language, it's right at the very end of the whole thing.
Okay.
Where you were in the permanent succession section. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about that at the very last item, it says that it proposes that the county council shall provide for temporary vacancy, and so I'm suggesting you could, either with a may or a shall, you could empower the council to provide for this possibility, but not try to do it directly in charter language.
Okay. Okay, why don't we do this? Can we start at the top with each one of the proposed amendments, look at the language, see if we have any quibbles or whether or not we believe that it's appropriate for us to make a recommendation for change at all. And if there is, with or without the quibbles, and we can vote either up or down.
Hey, Judge, I've got all these pages here, so I just need to know, county executive has what, 1, 2, 3 proposals, is that correct, or 2?
I've got county executive succession amendments. I've got 1. I've got 2. I've got 3.
Okay. And into
wait a minute.
4.
I got 4. Yeah. And then there's 1, 2, 3 as it relates to council. We're on the same page, Tom?
Yes, I am. Yeah,
Okay.
Thank you, Judge.
Okay. So the language for the first proposed amendment reads, in the event that the office of county executive becomes vacant by reason of death, removal from office, failure to remain an elector of the county, or for any other reason, the law director shall perform the duties of the county executive until an interim appointment is made. Within 14 days after the vacancy occurs, the county council shall make an interim appointment to the office of county executive. The interim appointee shall have been an elector of the county throughout the 2 years prior to the appointment and shall serve until a successor is elected and takes office, but shall, this still says, but shall not be a candidate in the election at which the appointee's successor is chosen. Was that the last draft?
So this, I believe, is the draft that was proposed by Councilman Miller.
Right.
And that we had talked about some modifications. I don't know if there was a subsequent
draft.
Formal draft
We
put
just said
together.
we were going to make some changes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I did submit a subsequent draft.
Okay. Has everybody got it? The subsequent draft?
I have it.
Am I the only one missing?
It's the one pager, like this, yeah.
Okay, got it.
So you passed out the last meeting?
It was a one-page document, the revised, no, it's a whole page.
Rely on you guys because I got too much paper here. Did you? Okay. While they're making copies, for those of you who have something in front of you, I think that we were all in agreement that we're not in favor of the last clause.
I agree with that.
Okay. So,
Did we come to consensus on the law director? I thought that we had disagreements on that one.
yes, I think we did.
Okay, so
So Susan, you're saying no? That we came to
I was saying I don't think there was agreement. I thought at the end of that conversation, we circled back saying maybe the current language should remain. I thought because we were talking about the law director, and then we were saying, well, why shouldn't it be the council president? Then we were talking about the days. And so after we went through all of it, I thought we said, oh, well, then I thought the conversation circled back to, then maybe the current language is what we would keep.
my notes differ a little bit in that, and this is where we're trying to cobble all this together. I thought we had provided that the council president revert to the council president, assuming the role on an interim basis, but that the council president could go back to his or her seat once a successor was elected, and that we would provide for a special election within some time frame. We had talked about 180 days, something like that, but we were waiting to hear back from the Board of Elections on what would be most appropriate given the election calendar. And then removal, as we just said, about that last sentence related to the interim being unable to run in that election. And I have a note related as to whether or not the special election would be partisan or not, but I didn't actually write down which way
You know,
we
it was,
landed.
I wrote
We
it
didn't
down,
resolve it.
question mark,
Okay.
we didn't know.
Okay.
Chairman, I just passed out some notes from the last meeting. We typed them up just in case if we would need them, so hopefully this may be able to help you as well.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe we should just keep it this way.
So looking at 2.04, we were talking about permanent vacancies, right? And had circled back around to the council president holding the interim spot for a period of not less than 30 days, right? Not more, that is, than 30 days.
Mr. Chair, I recall, and please correct me if I'm wrong,
No,
I
I'm
thought
not.
that we had gotten rid of the interim concept. I thought that we would have the council president serve until a successor is elected. Okay, I don't know if we landed finally on that, but that was part of the conversation.
Actually, I think you're right, Mike.
But I think that's the confusion. I think we had all these different ideas and we didn't land on any decision. And that's why I was saying then it kind of circled all the way back then. What do you change? Because then we left it at if we did that for an election, then we were saying that's what led into well, is this a partisan election or not? Because then does that conflict with another section of the charter? So, I don't think we actually agreed on any.
Which is why we were having this meeting
Right,
today.
which is right.
Yeah,
Right,
that's
exactly.
right. That's exactly right. Okay. Tom, while you're listening to all this dead air,
I am thinking, it's a wonder you don't smell the smoke all the way over there. We're going in circles here, we really are.
yeah.
And there has to be, in my opinion, more definitive language. I'm not comfortable with any of this. That's my opinion. I don't know what the rest of the group thinks.
Can we take each of these and just go through them again? Like, are we in agreement that the council president is the successor?
Well, let's even take it back one step further than that. You know, I think that where we left it at the last time was that we were unclear as to whether or not this needed to be amended at all. Okay, so the first order of business is, are we in agreement that that this language is deficient and that we need to change it? Tom, you're saying that it is, that the original language is deficient?
No, I'm saying the proposed language is I'm going in circles.
Okay.
And what I'm saying, if we're going to change it, I need some more definitive language because we talked, just like you heard, Judge, the law director, the county council president, back and forth, interim appointments. It's left me, I don't know what we're trying to accomplish here. Now, the current language is very clear as to what happened. But I understand Councilman Miller's position that at this point, the people, unless I'm reading this wrong, are left out of that equation, and he wants the people in the equation. Is that correct?
Councilman, did you hear what Tom just said?
It's my fault, sorry.
That's okay. Tom, you want to say what you were saying again, please?
Yes. The reason for the proposal is the councilman would like to see the people become a part of the equation. In the current language, it is defined and it rests with the council. Is that correct or not?
I believe that the current language places too much emphasis on a succession being by appointment under conditions where appointees can serve for a long time before they face the voters. That was one of the major deficiencies that I had identified. So yes, I think it would be a big improvement if we created a system where elections are held quickly after a vacancy occurs.
Now, Councilman, I got one other thing that's running through my mind through this, and I see where in some of the proposed language here we tie it to the closest general election. But if we're just going to start having elections, who's going to pay for all this?
Strongsville.
I have two things to say about that.
No, I just don't know.
It's a very valid question, and it's a question that I and my colleagues on the council have wrestled with. But first of all, this is the reason why I proposed having the special succession elections being a single election with no primary. It's obviously going to cost a lot less if you only have to have one election as opposed to two elections. The second question is it's a judgment call as to whether you feel that empowering the people by holding special elections is worth the cost involved. My opinion is that it is, and there are going to be times where the timing is just not going to line up so that you can have a special election at the same time as another election anytime soon, and that you're going to have a special election on a special day. But it's up to the commission to decide whether you value that involvement by the people sufficiently that under the right circumstances we would be willing to hold a special election on a special day and pay for it.
I just came down, everybody, just to show you I'm not dead.
Who is speaking? I didn't hear that.
That was the county executive.
And what did he say? I didn't hear him.
He said he just came down to stick his head in the door to show us that he was not dead and the position is not currently vacant. Okay. Man. I thought this was going to be real simple.
Mr. Chair.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
If I could suggest, I mean, I think maybe what might be beneficial is rather than trying to wordsmith specific language here in this room, because that is always, I think, going to take us in circles to a certain degree, is maybe talk about the major concepts about sort of who we think should succeed on an interim basis in some form or fashion, whether or not we in principle believe a special election model is the right one, and maybe a couple of the larger issues, and then ask our law department to put together some more specific language for a future meeting where we can sit down and parse that with a little more detail. I don't know.
Yeah, and that would also give us an opportunity to find out from the Board of Elections the information that they were going to provide to us today too. Right. So, you know, that makes a lot of sense.
I just think we need to really track carefully what's said here, and so it's captured completely, and then we have that base to work from. Because I think part of our challenge today is that we're just not sure of everything that was said last time. So I agree with the thought on the process. It's just...
We do record these meetings, and they're posted on the county's YouTube page. So if anybody, including our law department, wants to go back and watch that, I pity whoever has to go and relive all of this multiple times. But we do have a record that we can reference if we need to go back.
And Mr. Chair, that's helpful to know, because I think that's what we need is the major points that came out of the last meeting, which I know we have some here, but then to build on that and get the information from the board. Because I have to be, I'm just confused as to where we are right now. So.
Oh, that makes.
And maybe I'll be a little more blunt. I'm known for that. I'm sorry, and I don't mean it at all negatively. But in a process like this, having staff help to do that and to take what we're talking about and kind of list out those issues is really helpful. And I know it's not easy. It's tedious in and of itself, but that little step would help us not to relive everything that occurred at the last meeting. So I don't know how we do it, but when it's this detailed, that is really helpful to us. And I go back and read it. Just, I have my notes from the last meeting. When you mentioned it, Michael, I was right with you. I thought, yep, that's where it is. But if there's any way for us to really take a step back and ask for that kind of support, that would be helpful for us. And I hate to say it that way, but I mean, seriously, if I was staffing you guys, that's what I'd be doing. I'd say, let's go back over those tapes. What are those ideas? And not have us relive it at the meeting, because it's just not a great use of our time.
Absolutely. I agree. So, Janae?
I'm not sure who, but I'm just saying.
So are we looking at trying to go back over the last couple of meetings to find out what we did so we can know where we are, so we can know where we're going?
And I think you're right about going to the law department to really getting some help on taking a look at the draft. And I think some of the work that Councilman Miller has done in looking at Summit County is helpful. It really makes me kind of want to know more about that a little. Maybe even how do we do succession for the mayor of Cleveland? Just saying, So might be a little bit of digging into that to see best practice, what is going on there.
The other thing is, have we made a formal, and I don't know what the process is at the county, but in writing to the Board of Elections, or have we just conveyed that verbally to the representative that was here? And has there been any feedback or correspondence as to timeline?
My understanding is we made that oral representation, right. So I guess that we need to reduce that to writing and get that. And time-wise, because now we're kind of getting into a crunch because we only have until July to get all of this done.
Right.
Okay. And so we need to kind of have a summary of, at bare minimum, the last couple of meetings that we've had on this issue, so that the next time that we sit down to look at this, we will have had an opportunity in the interim period to address the issues in front of us. I think that following what you were saying, Michael, and maybe offline we can kind of have some additional conversation about this to share with the rest of the group. Identifying what are the key components, kind of tease those out from what Councilman Miller had to say, and kind of circulate that amongst the group so that we will, prior to the time we come in here to have this kind of conversation, that everybody will have had at least some thoughts as to what everybody else was thinking. And then when we come in here, we can have a more productive kind of time frame. But I think that it is important to look at, these issues that we were talking about with regard to vacancy and who's going to succeed and, what the time frames are. And everybody can kind of give some idea as to what their thoughts are as it relates to each one of those major pieces. And then when we sit down, we can try to cobble it together and see if it fits in the framework that Councilman Miller put forward, or whether we come up with another framework of our own, or, in a worst case scenario, do all of this work and come back to the position, nah, it's good. So,
well, that's okay if that's okay after we study it.
Right.
Right?
Absolutely.
So.
The only reason why I said in worst case scenario is because you will have gone all the way around the horn and come back to the exact same place that you started, which means that's an awful lot of time.
True.
Say, well, heck, we could have done that the first. Okay. All right. So, that being the case, I think that we're kind of at a spot where we need to take our leave with this till we can cobble this together back in a more usable form, because we're not there yet. Does that sound reasonable?
I agree, Judge.
Okay. 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 So that being the case, then I think we're going to move on to public input.
We have Ms. Lowe. Ms. Lou, sorry.
Actually, the minutes for the last meeting, actually, guess what? My words were in kind of detail. The transcription is almost 100% correct. I did mention that I didn't attend the previous. Oh, sorry. I didn't attend a previous meeting, so this one I did mention the video on our web, on YouTube or the county website is very helpful. Since I missed that one, not on purpose, I just couldn't make it. I studied through the video, and I think this will be very helpful. So you kind of you were there, so you can relive. This is comparing to the notes you already have. I think this is very helpful, because I guess if a clerk has to do it, I guess a clerk has to go through the same thing. But she was not the one having all the ideas. So if you go through the video just like I did, even I'm not even one of you guys sitting here. And that will be very helpful to see all the reasonings and all the options. And I did lots of comparing. That's why I watched that video at least 3 times for that reason, to compare certain things on the language. Mr. Miller pointed out certain things in the original language, so I could go, back and forth like that. I still stand by whatever I said in this minute. Of course, there's some either typos or not 100% accurate, but that's okay. I still think that the work for administrative work as a full-time job is a reasonable thing. So if some people think that the county council, doesn't matter, any county council member or the president can substitute for this position is not that reasonable, because, as I said last time, these people are also elected, but they are elected to give some oversight
or to give their opinions on what happened from administrative work. So it's a very different aspect. Plus, it's a part-time job. In that case, I still think within the system, if our county executive right there, still alive, yes, still breathing. If he can go on the vacation and still keep communication, just like what you mentioned there, if he has been in the hospital, but he can still communicate with all other, staffs and county directors, then he can still work or she can still work, right? In that case, this type of situation would not really cause a big trouble unless the injury or the illness is really permanent and it gets worse. Then that's a different situation. So still, I wish it's somebody who understands administrative work to step in for the temporary situation. I still don't think it's good for even elected but only a part-time position person and working from a complete different angle in the government and on behalf of all the people to do this kind of work. It doesn't match.
Mm-hmm. So if I understand you correctly, and I may or may not, what you're saying in essence is that if we were going to have somebody serve in the interim capacity, that it should be someone
who's familiar with the work. For example, branch. Our executive there, he or she has to do. I'm not talking about you or she at this moment. I'm just saying, in any time during all the terms, we may have a female, just like we will have a male executive. So I'm just saying, it should be somebody.
What I'm saying, Ms. Lewis, you're saying it should be somebody from the executive branch as opposed to somebody from the legislative branch.
Yes, that's because the type of job is a full-time for administrative work. You have to deal with lots of things in certain detail day in, day out. So it's really not good to get somebody who's only working part-time and complete using a different perspective to help out the government work. So they don't really match that well.
Okay.
Now, as to we will have a special election or not, I think it's a good idea if the term, later when we check with Board of Election or Law Department, if the time will be a little longer, yes, it's good to have special election. One thing, I'm representing the people without any money, so I do agree that's less expensive, as Mr. Miller says. And I do want to emphasize, which I didn't say last time, it should be no partisan. We want to encourage people to participate because everything the government is doing is for everybody's life, everybody in this county. Right now, the whole system actually, you kind of exclude lots of people to participate already. So for a special election, I wish we can have something to encourage people to participate. Anyway, the person will be elected to do the work will be shorter time. It's not a full term to begin with. So if this guy cannot do the job too well, at least when we go to the formal one, then people can elect somebody else who has a strong experience and passion for this kind of work. And it's really silly to waste the time. You put a county executive as a vacant, fine, then you have to pull another person from the county council to do the job, and so this position is also vacant. That's really the waste of time because now you have two parts of it you have to consider. So I think it should be simpler, plus it will fit the nature of the type of work they do. Thank you.
Okay. Since the county exec is here, I just had a quick question for you too.
This has nothing to do with what you're talking about, by the way.
Okay. I wanted to ask you, in the relationship, professional relationship that you have with the law director, does that put him in a position where he really is pretty much on top of all the things that you touch base with, or is his job function segregated in some way from, just so it's just basically dealing with the legal aspects of things?
at least the way we are operating now, and I think the way it operated in the last term, the person who's most familiar with everything that's going on would be the chief of staff. The law director is in a unique position and might be a benefit to this if you move in this direction, in that the law director is probably the only administrative position, correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, that works for both council and the administration. So it's clearly a full-time job. It is law-related. The way I operate, the law director is involved in a lot of things, because we operate in a fairly open fashion in terms of our chiefs. But the law director does have responsibility to counsel, unlike my other administrative positions. So, and he recognizes that. I mean, that's the way he operates. So that might be a plus if you're looking for somebody.
Okay, thank you. Any questions?
But now, after listening to this, I think I can't go home tonight, or somebody will declare me missing, and then Dan Brady will become the next executive. Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, Armin.
Who was that? Mayor Person. Thank you, Mayor.
Any other public comment?
Yeah, Mr. Turner.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. No, this comment is not about campaign finance. Actually, that was a really interesting point that Lou made about full-time executive and part-time counsel, and I know whether the counsel is really part-time, I think, is an open discussion given the work that they do. My comment is about the helpfulness in following who is going to succeed who and when. When I look at the proposals and the discussion that's been had so far, at the moment, respectfully, it's a wall of words. And I believe that for a member of the general public who's not maybe able to follow from point A to point B the different models, if there was some type of visual representation of what the current succession planning is now and what a proposed model would look like, an organizational chart, for example, that would be easy to see in what instance would a person be appointed on a temporary basis, in what instance would a person on a permanent basis, and then how does that affect the dominoes of other individuals who would move up. So I think just having like a current, a temporary fill-in, if you will, and a permanent scenario would probably make it a little bit easier for individuals like me to be able to follow from one scenario to the other. So just as a suggestion, as Ms. Rosacco was pointing out earlier on how to be able to perhaps evaluate different scenarios, presenting things graphically might make it a little bit easier for me to follow, and just want to make that suggestion to the commission.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions?
I swear by dry erase boards, so I'm just saying.
Any additional questions? We're going to do the doodle thing again. We were scheduled for May the 2nd. I've got something that came up for me that makes May the 2nd not viable. I'm not the monkey that stops the show. If you guys want to hold a meeting on the 2nd, you certainly can do that. Dennis, you can sit in. Between now and then, I'm going to be on vacation. So I get back on the 28th, and then I'm out again on the 2nd. So if you want to do something else, that's fine.
Mr. Chairman, I just, I'm happy to complete the doodle polls, not a problem, but I really want us to be thoughtful about the scheduling from now through the end in terms of, what we've talked about needing ahead of time, several days ahead of time to look at. And maybe once we get an understanding of where the Board of Elections is and what their time schedule is and how we're going to do the backup, then we could do a poll based on when it would make most sense to have a meeting.
Okay.
So.
That sounds eminently reasonable. So we'll make sure that that's the way it happens.
Okay.
Okay? Because, yeah. Understood. Okay. Anything else for the good of the order? Okay. That being the case, seems that we are adjourned. We will find out what your availability is and the availability of all the other necessary parts for the next meeting.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.